Welcome to the Empowered Christian Woman Podcast. My name is Jeanette Cochran. I'm a pastor, women's leadership coach, and self-proclaimed Jesus feminist. I'm on a mission to inspire and equip women everywhere to own our voice, speak up, create, and lead wherever God calls. Because when women rise, everyone wins. Hello, my amazing friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Empowered Christian Woman Podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to a female leader who is courageously following God's call to lead in an unusual place. We're going to take a dive into the journey of Brooke Palmer, who is a remarkable pastor, and she is doing something highly unusual and incredibly inspiring. She's planning a church as the lead pastor here in Urbana, Maryland, just a couple of towns over from where I live and a short 30-minute drive from where my church resides here in Maryland. And in a landscape where few women take on the role of lead pastor, even fewer plant new churches, it's not an easy task. But Brooke is blazing a new trail. And her journey is not just about building a new church, which in and of itself is so important, but it's also about breaking barriers and challenging the status quo. It's about opening up opportunities for the ways that we lead and reimagining what church leadership can and should be. Brooke candidly shares about some of the unique challenges that she has faced as a woman in this space, shedding light on the discrimination that many of her male church counterparts don't encounter. And throughout the conversation, she opens up about some of the ways that she has had to pivot and adapt, showing a resilience and creativity that I find just incredibly courageous and inspiring. Brooke also paints a beautiful and compelling vision for a belonging community church, the church that she is called to plant here right outside of Washington, D.C. So as you listen to our conversation, I really want you to consider if Brooke's story and her vision resonate with you, would you consider supporting her mission, whether prayerfully or maybe making a financial contribution to help her church get up and running on a strong financial foundation? You could play a crucial role in helping this Jesus-centered church plant take root and flourish. And while you're supporting a gospel-centered church, you will also be supporting the full inclusion of women's gifts in leadership in our Christian communities as you just encourage and support Brooke in blazing this new trail. And now sit back and enjoy my conversation with Pastor Brooke Palmer. Hello, Brooke. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you on today as a guest, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to join me. I think it's really important to amplify the voices of Christian women leaders, and especially to showcase women leaders who are doing extraordinary work in the world, in the church, because we are out there, but so often overlooked. And so I just see you as a woman who's trusting God and doing amazing things. And I want to share that with others so that they can be inspired for what maybe they can do. And also that they can maybe learn a little bit about how they might even be able to support you through prayer or through supporting some of your endeavors. So why don't we just start by give us a little bit of a background about who Brooke is and how you actually became a pastor, because that's still unusual in Christian evangelical circles to be a woman that is a pastor with a pastor title. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on with you today, Jeanette. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I was a musician actually for 20 years. I was a trumpet player professionally for 20 years. And during that time, my husband became a pastor. he's been a kids pastor he's working in kids ministry for like 18 years. And so I was the pastor's wife for a lot of years. But through that, never really felt like I fit the stereotype. There's the stereotype of the pastor's wife, at least in the Midwest where I grew up. And I've lived most of my life in the Midwest. But, that's where I was. And I was doing my thing and just trying to support him and work alongside him in children's ministry. And then back in, I would say it's 2015. Yeah, I was teaching at a church camp with my husband, and we were in a service, like a big, service with lots of people. And the pastor who was speaking, I mean, it's a huge room, right? But this pastor that was speaking, I felt like he was talking right to me. I don't know if anybody's ever had that moment that's listening where you're in a church service and you feel like, I think he's talking to me, it was that. And he said, I feel like somebody's being called into the ministry today. And he was looking right at me. At least I felt like he was looking right at me. Right. But I felt it very strongly, but I didn't quite understand it. And I didn't even think it was maybe the right thing, because I had been taught for so long that a woman shouldn't be a pastor. That wasn't a role fit for a woman, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of went, okay, God. And I started exploring, well, what would that look like? I'd have to go to school. My degrees are in music, and I'd have to do some studying, and then within 6 months, we had moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where the seminary I wanted to attend was. And I took the hint from God and said, okay, I'll enroll. And I enrolled in seminary. And I was the student that they would say, well, what are you going to do with your degree? And I said, I have no idea. Like, I don't even know. I just know I'm supposed to do this. And I looked kind of weird and sounded kind of weird, but I just knew that. But I still wasn't quite sure that it was right, But then through that journey, I learned, yeah, this is what God's called me to do. And you know what? Actually, in the scriptures, it says that this is okay. This is okay what I'm doing. And through that time became an intern. I had to do an internship at a church in Germantown, and then came on staff and began preaching. And God just used all my years of experience in life, in music and other places, said, here you go. You can learn everything and do this. And it's been a quick catch up, I feel like, because I think a lot of women feel that way. Like they feel like I got to catch up to where maybe some of the male counterparts are, but he's just opened doors and I've just followed. So it was interesting. It's been interesting. If you knew me like 20 years ago and me now, you wouldn't have guessed it. It was really God calling and changing my heart and understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, I do hear some similarities in a lot of women's stories, especially the going to seminary and saying, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this, or like I don't have clarity, which not every man goes to seminary knowing exactly what he's doing, but it's not uncommon for young men, even sometimes when they're children, to be like, oh, I'm going to be a pastor, and they just know and they go directly for it. And I was a little bit the same way when I felt the call to seminary. I knew that God was expanding my role as a leader in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, I didn't really have the courage or it felt like audacity almost to say like, oh no, because I'm going to be a pastor in the church. And the tide is changing, and my heart really hopes that as we move forward, that more and more of that will change, that more women will be able to hear our calling younger in our life. Because I know for myself, and I suspect for you now, looking back, you can kind of see like, this is who you've always been. This was always the path that you were supposed to take. But if it seems like that it's not available to you and there's no one in your life affirming that, it can just take us so much longer to hear God's call.
Right. Right. I mean, it's hard. It's hard when you're younger to be what you don't see. Right. And, I never saw a woman preaching on a Sunday morning, like ever. And when we moved to Maryland and went to church in Germantown, our first Sunday there 7 years ago, there was a woman preaching. She was on staff. And that was the first time my daughters had been in a church service where there was a woman preaching. And I remember just going into that service and crying because I'm like, they get to see it. They haven't seen it yet and they get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. And so many of us have daughters that we definitely feel the call to do this for. I have two granddaughters now, and when they were born, I knew in my heart, I knew that God specifically gave me granddaughters because immediately my thought was, I want to make sure there are churches in their communities that they can go to where they are not going to be minimized, where all of their gifts will be celebrated and welcomed. And that's still hard to find here.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so having granddaughters has made me even more passionate about just empowering women and advocating for women's voices. So you stepped fully into that calling, felt confident in your theological understandings and certain in your call. And now you are planting a church, which really is pretty bold. So church planting is not for the faint of heart.
Right.
And you're the first woman church planter I've ever met. Now, I'm sure there's more out there. I know that they're probably very few and far between.
They are, yeah.
Let me just say, you're the first woman church planter that I've ever met. And so I think that's awesome and very courageous. So how did that happen? How did you decide to actually plant a church?
Yeah, I mean, so, I got to that point where I was at a church and leading and doing what I was gifted to do, and started to feel God calling me to lead a church, and I didn't know what that would look like either. Just like back in seminary, I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I felt like God was saying there's something else. And so I met with the lead pastor I was working for, and he came with here's some ideas, like what you could do, what he thought I, would see and could do. And, one of them was maybe look for a job at a smaller church, and lead it and grow it, or maybe lead a campus, try to find a campus at a church job, or you could plant. And as we're talking through it, I was like, there just aren't a lot of churches hiring women to be their lead pastors. And I explored it for a while and worked with a couple of large staffing agencies. And I just was very frank with them. I'm like, what is the likelihood of me being placed, in a lead role? And one of the largest organizations out there that I was working with said, well, in the past year, we've placed one woman lead pastor. And that's progress.
Wow.
And I was like, okay.
And this was a large church staffing organization that is
large national, yes, very large national organization. And they had placed one lead as a woman. But there are plenty of jobs. It's not a job shortage. It's men are getting multiple offers and women. So, but I did pursue it for a while, and I got along in a few things, but it never felt right. And then God would shut the door. And all along the while, I was working with Stadia Church Planting and going through their process. They have this 3-phase discovery process. It took me about a year to get through. So as I was interviewing, I was also working on the church planting process. And anytime I maybe got along in an interview process, I would feel this isn't right. But the church planting, I felt God was like, this is it. And in the end, that was what God really called me into. Everything else was closed. I went through a Stadia, came through the end, and they were like, yeah, they gave me the thumbs up. Like a whole group of people affirmed, this is what you should do. And I remember the last part of it, you had to go in person to New York City to this intensive event. And I had gotten the thumbs up and everything, was going. And I got on the bus to head back to Maryland. And I just let down, like tears and just all this emotion of, oh, okay, this is it. This is what God's called me to. And I realized what an emotional ride that had been trying to find that place as a woman leader. But it was really just God just kept pushing me. Nope, go this way. And I would want to push back because that, like you said, is crazy. Planting a church, that's not easy. But he kept pushing me back. And now I just know that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's hard, but that was kind of the process that I went through to figure it out.
And I love that Stadia accepted your application, but allowed you to go through the process. So you went through the same rigorous process that your male counterparts go through.
Exactly.
And, you have prepared yourself just like them with your theological training, and that they have said, yeah, we see and we affirm the gifts that God has given you. That in itself is like, thank you, God, that,
Yeah.
a praise that there is some progress, but still so much more work to be done. So what have you learned? What are some of the leadership lessons that you have picked up along the way in this process of church planting that kind of stick with you?
There's one big one that I think might be unique to a woman leader in this process. When I was in seminary, there was my ethics course, one of my favorite courses. And my ethics professor would talk about how there's always a third way to think about a situation. People think it's this or that, but no, there's always a third way thinking, he would call it. And what I've learned as a woman leader trying to plant a church is to think of the third way all the time, because like fundraising, for example, well, the same churches that won't hire a woman, that I spoke about earlier, they won't fund a woman either, right? So in my leadership cohort, I was the only woman. The men, they're working hard to find funding too, but it was a lot easier for them. Whereas me, it's been a lot harder. So I've had to think, okay, what else could I do? You know what? There are some egalitarian churches out there in our area, and they don't have a lot of the funding, but they do have a lot of supplies. Like they do have a lot of things where they used to be portable. And so I started fundraising and stuff raising, which isn't something the men in my group have done at all. But for me, it's been huge. And I've seen God work that way. So there's been all kinds of things along the way where I've just realized, okay, this is what the textbook says to do. And this maybe is what a lot of the men in my world are doing. But there's another way that God's showing me that I can do as a woman, because he has called me to this and he's making a different way. So I've really been practicing in leadership. What's the other way to think about this? And it's been beneficial for me.
I love that. That's such an important reminder in all leadership situations. I mean, that's where innovation shows up.
Right.
And that, quite frankly, is why I think the church needs to have diversity in their leadership, because we need new paradigms of leadership, especially in the world today. And so just by your very nature of being a woman and experiencing the world differently, you've had to show up and think differently and find new and innovative ways. It just can be discouraging, right? Like as we keep pushing through and keep trusting God in our callings and just hit roadblocks that others don't experience.
Right.
It can be really overwhelming, and at times it can just be exhausting. And so what do you do to take care of yourself in order to stay in that hopeful, positive light? What are some of the things that have helped you to just keep going and not give up no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, I've been learning another thing in this process is to like stop at the end of the day and actually not work for a while. Like rest. Rest is really important, even more important now. I mean, it's always been important, but I've been a like great workaholic for a long time. And you would think in this time with starting a new organization that I would be like, well, I'm just going to work, work, work. But I've learned like, because I do feel what you're saying. Like I do feel the moments of like discouragement or fatigue or whatever. So I have learned like I've got to stop at a certain time, and I've got to take a day off, and I've got to do something fun with my kids. And if they won't come and say, I want to go get an iced tea at Starbucks, you know what? I'm going to stop and I'm going to do that because I need those moments of just refreshment and something different, going on in my head. And I think that can be hard for a person who's maybe, Enneagram 8 overworker person like myself to do that. But I'm learning how important that is to help me through the emotional ups and downs of this, because it's kind of like a roller coaster, you know. So rest.
Yeah.
Rest.
That's
and
so
laughter
important.
and fun. Something fun and that makes you laugh.
I'm with you on that. I don't know why it takes us so long to learn that, but you're fortunate that that is a lesson that you're getting at this end, because I find that so many pastors, and I've been there in my 20 plus years of ministry through seasons of burnout and fatigue. It's really kind of insidious because it sneaks up on you and you
Right.
don't always recognize what's happening until you get into full-blown burnout, or just, where when you start to realize like a vacation is not going to do it. I need some extended downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning to actually have those daily rhythms is so crucial. And it's not always the stop working. I think the emotional toll that ministry takes in general,
Yeah.
and then add on things that we experience as a woman where we are discriminated against or discouraged by people,
Right.
that just takes such a greater toll on us. And so having methods and ideas to just, rest, relax, have fun are so important.
Yeah.
And so because you have a family as well, so you're
Yes.
balancing, you talked about your husband. How many kids do you have?
We have five, ages 11 to 21. So the oldest is not living at home anymore. She's living in Washington, D.C., working out there. So, and my second is in college in Phoenix, but she is home for the summer. So three are still full time at home. And then the fourth is come and go, But yeah,
That's a
so
lot.
big family. Yeah.
I'm sure that does keep you busy. So yeah, oh my. Um, and so the church that you're planning is called Belonging Community Church. It's going to be here in Maryland in Urbana.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your vision for this community. Like what's really important to you as you launch out on building a church? What do you think a healthy church needs?
Yeah. I mean, our vision statement is that every person would find a place of belonging and purpose in God's story. So through my own journey through church life, I find in this stage of my life that it is really important that a person who comes into or in contact with a church knows that they belong right from the beginning. That they don't have to clean themselves up or be a certain way to be able to come in, or they don't have to not have doubts or questions. They don't have to think just like me to be a part of it. And so that's important, but also Jesus, right? So we're a church that's centered on Jesus and his message. But I want belonging to be at the center too, because I don't want us as a church to get in the way of somebody being able to encounter Jesus. And I think my experience in the American church, the overall church, is that happens far too much, where the church prioritizes methods over their mission and just gets in the way. And so I want us to be a place where people can come, a diverse group of people can come together and know that they are welcome to learn, to question, to doubt, to figure it out. And really, it's our job as the church to let the Holy Spirit work on them. We're to preach the good news to them and let the Holy Spirit work and not get in the way. So that is the culture I want our church to have. And as far as what makes a healthy church, I think as a leader, I am so sensitive to the fact that I have to be healthy, and create that kind of culture of belonging and focus on Jesus on our staff so that we're healthy together. Because I've been a part of a lot of churches where the staff is just unhealthy and that bleeds into the church. And so I've got a lot of experience in the what is not healthy area, and I'm very sensitive to that as well. So me caring for anybody that is leading along with me to keep us as healthy as possible too, because if we're unhealthy, we're not gonna be able to lead people to create a place like this, because that's not easy. It's not easy to get people together who don't think the same or look the same, but that's what we're going to be, and that's what Urbana needs. So
I love that. What a beautiful vision. And I agree so much on the leader. The health of the leader determines the health of the team and the health of the church. And one of my personal phrases that I try and keep at the forefront that sounds pretty negative, but it's actually been very empowering for me. As a leader, I'm constantly, when I'm seeing things that I don't like or I want changed, I will remind myself, hey, you know what? This is all my fault. And that sounds like a real negative. But what I mean by that is, as the leader, I either allowed this to happen, or what am I doing that's creating a culture for this to happen, right? So just it kind of turning it back in and realizing, oh, wow, this is all my fault, which sounds really negative. But when you realize as a leader that you have that kind of influence, then you realize, and I can change it. Right?
Yeah. Right.
And just starting with, first of all, looking in the mirror and saying, what am I doing as a leader that might be contributing to this? How do I need to change my leadership? What conversation do I need to have? How do I need to, to maybe work differently with my staff? And so I wish every church staff that their leaders at the top would recognize that they have more influence and more power for good or for bad than maybe they realize.
Yeah.
And then prioritize your health so that you can prioritize the health of your staff. So what advice would you give to other women who aspire to be leaders in their churches? And maybe they're hitting some roadblocks, or maybe like you, they're just not even sure what to do. What advice might you have for them?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind. One thing that I wish somebody would have told me a long time ago in some pretty hurtful places where I was trying to, live out my gifts and calling, and it was being pushed, was it's okay to leave. It's okay to leave a space that isn't welcoming your call and ability, or that you no longer can have any influence in. And that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. But I wish somebody would have told me that a long time ago, because I think it would have saved me some pain along the way. But, another thing is, if you're a person who is feeling like, I think there's maybe something, but I don't even know if this is right, or whatever, I would say, find somebody who's doing it. Find a woman who's doing it and reach out to them and have a conversation, because I know the women that I know in church world who are leading, if another woman comes to them and is wanting to know about how to do what we're doing, or wants to know more about it, we want to talk to them, because we want to help. I mean, almost every woman I've met in a leadership role in the church wants to help other women lead in the church. It's just, we want to do that because we understand the difficulty and the pushback and all of that. And we've kind of pushed through it ourselves, and we want to make it easier for others.
Yes.
So find somebody who's doing it. Even if that person seems like they are far off, far away, get a message to them, because I bet you that they will respond and would love to talk with you about it. That's what I've experienced. We want to help, we want to support others. So
I agree. I find more and more women in church leadership that are helping one another. Patriarchy tricks women into thinking that there are limited spaces for us and that we have to compete for those spaces. And
Yeah.
when we really open up to the fact that no, God calls and God gifts women, and there's no shortage of places for us to use our gifts and to make a difference in the kingdom of God, then we're free to say, we don't need to compete with one another. We need to help one another. And then that actually then is diminishing patriarchy rather than keeping the patriarchal structures in place that hold us back. So I love that advice to find someone that's doing it, and chances are great that they're going to want to help you and encourage you along the way. Okay, well, this has been great. If people want to find out more about your church and maybe even want to support your church, I know we have listeners here in the area. We have listeners that are all over the United States. Where can they find out more about Belonging Community Church? And I would encourage listeners to look you up and maybe even make a financial donation to your startup, because I know, as you said, fundraising has been a little bit more difficult for you than the men, just because you're a woman. Fully called and gifted and a beautiful vision that our community needs. So where can they find out more about how they could pray for you or support you in this church plant?
Yeah. So on social media, you could look us up on Facebook or Instagram. So on Facebook, it's Belonging Community Church. On Instagram, it's at Belonging CC. And we're on YouTube as well. So it's just at Belonging Community Church on YouTube. And then we have a website, which is belongingcc.com, and you can get all the information there. And there are links on our website to give. On there, it's real easy to give right online. So that would be the easiest place to find that for sure.
It's been so nice having this conversation with you, Brooke. Thank you. And
thank you.
I definitely can see your leadership gifts, and your faith is so inspiring. And I'm praying for your church and want to be supportive in any way that I possibly can. We definitely need an open and welcoming and egalitarian gospel preaching church here in our community. And I'm glad that you're going to be bringing that to us. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Empowered Christian Woman Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share it with other women in your network. For more information about me and the work that I do, check out JeanetteCochran.com. And I'd love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social. You can find me on Facebook at J Cochran Coach or Instagram at Jeanette.Cochran.